Good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to this morning's webinar brought to you by the Women in Transport Awards and in partnership with the Durban Chamber of Commerce and the Industry Women in Business Forum. My name is Kelly and I'm the Program Director for Transport Evolution. Our all-female panel will focus on the integral role that the transport and logistics sector will play in the recovery of the economy. Before I introduce you to our moderator for this morning, I'm pleased to give Ms. Tozi Mtwetwa an opportunity to welcome you. Tozi is the chairperson of the Women in Business Forum at the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Tozi, thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, good morning, Kelly. Thank you so much for the partnership with the Durban Chamber of Commerce. We really appreciate working together with you in driving what is becoming a critical program in our country, which is the economic recovery program. We know that COVID has been unkind to all of us, and it is important that we work together and assist the economy to recover. If you think back to the beginning of the year 2020, we all went about setting our resolutions for the year. Little did we know that from the end of March to where we are now, we would have spent 7 months in lockdown. This lockdown has had, various kinds of impact, both at a social and at an economic level as well. And that is where we come in the latter as the Durban Chamber of Commerce. So we look after the interests of business in the province of KZN, mainly in Durban. We are an NPC and are responsible for coordinating business support services for our clients. Our membership is made up of all levels of businesses, from your large corporate organizations to SMMEs. And the needs of the different business segments obviously differ. As the Women in Business, specifically as a chapter of the Durban Chamber of Commerce, Kelly, we focus on supporting women-owned enterprises who are members of the Durban Chamber of Commerce. We encourage women who own and operate businesses but have not yet become members of the chamber to come closer to us so that we can work together. We have 3 focus areas as Women in Business Forum. One, we look at driving enterprise development, making sure that women-owned enterprises are aware of opportunities that exist in the local economy for them to get engaged with those opportunities. We facilitate introductions to key personnel so that those people can understand what women in business do in Durban via the Durban Chamber of Commerce and what opportunities can they be able to access from the market in Durban. Secondly, we look at the issue of leadership. We believe that women are not only mothers and nurturers. We believe that in the boardroom, women have a big role to play. So part of our work in the forum is to build the leadership capacity of women so that they're able to lead themselves, lead their own enterprises, and lead our nation. The third and last part is building strategic partnerships, building smart networks. Gone are the days, and COVID has demonstrated very, very clearly that the days of working in silos are no more. The COVID recovery plan talks about partnership between private sector and business sector in order to enable the shift that is required as we assist business to pivot from the challenges of COVID that we have seen. So that being said, on those 3 key focus areas of the Women in Business Forum, we work with partners like yourselves to bring content and opportunities to women so that they can, in an informed and intelligent manner, participate in those opportunities. We are watching very closely the developments in government as well. We listened attentively to the speech of the finance minister yesterday. We know what the matching orders that have been provided there. I must also say that the funding packages that have been provided by government as a way of helping enterprises survive the COVID pandemic have come at the right time. And we hope that, we'll soon be out of this pandemic situation that we are in. We're obviously concerned, Kelly, that whilst we're in level 1 of lockdown and have seen quite a nice shift in some of the businesses generating nice sales, meaning they're coming up to some level of normality with their business operations. But we hear that the second wave is coming. So we do ask as Women in Business for our members and our followers to continue to observe the lockdown regulations. We are in level 1, so masks must still be worn. We've been attending some of the events live. Continue to social distance, wash or sanitize your hands. But what we don't want to neglect is continue to network. Women must continue to put themselves out there, network with one another, seek out these opportunities. So using virtual channels, we encourage women to put themselves out there and continue to drive the survival and the recovery of our businesses post-COVID-19. As the Chamber of Commerce, we are open for business. We call on those who are not our members to come closer to us, and together we will drive the economic recovery strategy. I look forward to the conversations. I'm so pleased to see that my board member, Ms. Simpume, who's also a part of the panel, who's a director at Unilever and is a real driver for women empowerment. I'm really pleased to see her on the program. I've seen Candice, I've seen all the other participants. I'm really so pleased to be part of this auspicious occasion. And I do hope that in the new year, we will be doing our programs live together, because I love human-to-human contact, and I hope we can meet each other soon. But I'm really excited, Kelly, and I'm looking forward to today's proceedings. Thank you to you guys for the partnership. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And big up to the Chamber team as well. They've done a stunning job in preparation for this, both Barry and Yolen. You guys are amazing. And to all the ladies, really, let's kick it, guys. Let's make it happen. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Ozzy, thank you so much. And I absolutely agree with you. We're definitely looking forward to live events and hopefully next year. Candice, I'd like to introduce you very quickly and welcome you as our moderator for today. Candice Whitefield is a director at Moore Global. Candice, thank you so much, and I'll leave it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, Tozy. It's amazing to kick off a webinar after such a great introduction. So I'd like to start us off. So welcome to everyone. The integral role that transport sector will play in the recovery of the economy. First up, we have Trudy Nichols from Bowmans. Trudy is a consultant in the Durban office for the ports, transport and logistics sector, after having been a partner for over 5.5 years and practicing attorney for over 21 years. Trudy has legal and consulting experience within the ports and transport and logistics sector. She has conducted due diligence investigation, risk assessments, and provided advice to clients in relation to the existing and regulatory port legislation, legal framework, and applicable legislations. Who better to give some insights? Trudy, welcome. I'm excited to see what you have to say today.
Thank you very much, Candice. And it's my absolute pleasure to be able to join you at the invitation of DMG and the Durban Chamber of Commerce to talk about this very important topic in relation to COVID recovery as we move forward, and hopefully we don't experience a second wave. I'm going to try and share my screen now. So the topic of conversation this morning is the role that the transport and logistics sector will play in the recovery of the economy. And I'm going to start off by just mentioning that in April 2020, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development noted that as part of the measures to respond to and mitigate the potentially crippling longer-term consequences of the impact of COVID-19, it is crucial to keep ships moving, ports open, and cross-border and transit trade flowing while ensuring that border agencies can safely undertake all necessary controls. Facilitating trade and the transport of goods has become more important than ever to avoid logistics obstacles that can lead to shortages of necessary supplies. This observation was made during the height of the pandemic, acknowledging the important role of the transport sector. And the importance and the integral role of the transport sector applies equally post-COVID-19. The economy of our country has contracted as a result of the measures which have been put in place to address the COVID-19 pandemic, which has revealed just how vulnerable countries and regions have become in a hyper-globalized world, which is dependent on financial flows and value chains that can, quite frankly, severely impact the real economy of a national state. The pandemic has induced a crisis in the real economy of production and not merely within the financial sphere. So the transport and logistics sector plays a key role in the economy of any country and will therefore play a key role in the recovery of our economy. The economic benefits of exchange and trade in reducing poverty and inequalities has been globally accepted. And it's also acknowledged that the transport sector as a key facilitator of trade is a central player, and it lies at the heart of globalization. Transport systems, however, need to be reliable and sustainable to support economic recovery. At the aggregate level, efficient transportation reduces costs in many economic sectors, while inefficient transportation increases costs. And when transport systems are efficient, they provide economic and social opportunities and benefits that result in positive multiplier effects such as better accessibility to markets, employment, and additional investments. So transportation is essentially an economic factor of production of goods and services, implying that it is fundamental in their generation, even if it accounts for a small share of the input costs. This means that irrespective of the costs, an activity cannot take place without the transportation factor and the mobility it provides. Thus, relatively small changes in transport costs, capacity and performance can have a substantial impact on dependent economic activities. So transport also contributes to economic development and recovery through job creation and its derived economic activities. So accordingly, many direct, such as freighters, managers, and shippers, and indirect, such as insurers, financiers, packages, handlers, and transit operators, employment are associated with transport. And producers and consumers make their decisions on products, markets, and costs, which are themselves based on transport services, their availability, cost, capacity, and reliability. So the reliability of logistics chains is an important service factor, and unreliability tends to arise at interfaces. This is interfaces between countries, between ports and hinterland connections, at modal interchanges, and between warehouses and carriers. Efficient and reliable multimodal logistics corridors will be key to the recovery of the province, the country, the region, and the continent. So contextually, I'm going to consider the role of the transport sector briefly and at a very high level in relation to Durban, the country, as well as the continent. So from a Durban perspective, you cannot but start from the port of Durban, which is considered as being the gateway into Africa. It handles the greatest volume of seagoing traffic on any South African port. It services its own industrial and commercial region, in addition to much of South Africa's hinterland, including the majority of Gauteng traffic and significant amounts of traffic for neighboring countries. Ports are an integral part of most multimodal logistics corridors. They are regarded as funnels to economic development, since they act as a catalyst and incite development to take place in specific economic sectors and locations nearby ports or along the corridors. Hinterland transport capacity and accessibility are contingent on the cargo bound to and originating from the port. So port throughput is in general positively related to employment in port regions, implying that the higher the throughput, the more the employment. Ports facilitate direct revenue generation and economic benefits, such as at the port through the various activities that take place at the port. For example, the charges levied on ships and cargo for use of the port, fees for pilotage, berthing and towing, and charges for cargo handling and demurrage. Also terminal concession fees and rental fees for land. The additional direct benefits are revenue generated by the transport sector servicing the port, such as trucking companies and railway lines. Ports also facilitate indirect benefits to port users, such as companies that import or export goods from the port. Cost savings here include reduced shipping costs when there are reduced turnaround times from increased port efficiencies, such as more berth space, better channel access, better terminal productivity, reduced processing time for cargo. And then these enhanced port facilities and operations may also reduce inland transport costs as a result of less congestion, increased productivity, and better turnaround times. Ports also enable induced benefits to the economy, such as income to labor employed in port-related activities and industries supplying the port with goods and services, which creates indirect employment. So it is argued that ports expand the market opportunity of both national and international companies. By expanding the market areas of companies, ports increase competition, resulting in lower prices for port traffic users, and these involve all economic activity sectors, such as manufacturing, heavy industries, resource extraction, retailers, and agriculture. Therefore, the economic benefits of ports are specific to the nature of the hinterland they service, and the Port of Durban, as we all know, has quite an extensive hinterland. Moving on to the national perspective, the South African Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan was recently delivered, and its interventions are in pursuit of the National Development Plan goals of reducing unemployment, poverty, and inequality. It's geared towards ensuring that beyond just returning the economy to its pre-COVID-19 levels, it adds more GDP growth and jobs. The transport sector, which is the only aspect I'm going to focus on, and gender parity play a key role in many aspects of this plan. For example, some of the priority interventions which will be made are aggressive infrastructure investment, employment-orientated strategic localization, re-industrialization and export promotion, and gender equality and economic inclusion of women and youth. To support economic reconstruction and recovery, some of the structural reforms which will be implemented are reorientating trade policies and pursuing greater regional integration to boost exports, employment, and innovation, lowering barriers to entry to make it easier for businesses to start, grow, and compete, promoting greater beneficiation of raw materials, addressing racial, gender, and geographical inequalities which hamper deep economic growth and development. And then, as part of the priority intervention of infrastructure investment, delivery, and maintenance, it records that efforts will be strengthened to attract private investment in the delivery of infrastructure as part of building broad-based PPP. And this will include a review of the PFMA and the MFMA to facilitate PPPs. The infrastructure delivery program is intended to prioritize network industries to support a long-term increase in the productive capacity of the economy, with the potential to crowd in additional private sector investment. And the modernization of freight and public transport is intended to receive immediate attention. So the following will be implemented: ensuring improved efficiencies at ports of entry, protecting passenger and freight rail infrastructure from vandalism, arson, and other crimes, and fast-tracking approved integrated public transport network in 5 cities, providing support to the taxi industry, the development of the Small Harbours project, and the rollout of a labor-intensive rural roads asset network using alternative technologies, as well as local supply and value chains. So in the delivery of infrastructure, local industries will be privileged. The empowerment of women, young people, persons with disability, and military veterans will also be strengthened in a manner that fosters competitiveness and resilience. And an additional point is that as part of the priority intervention of gender equality and economic inclusion of women and youth, it notes that the interventions that form part of the plan will be geared towards promoting greater participation by Black people, women, youth, and persons with disability at all economic levels. And this will be done as part of transforming patterns of asset ownership and income distribution in our society. The government aims to ensure effective gender mainstreaming in all aspects of the plan through the participation and mobilization of women at all levels. This includes such mechanisms as the 40% set aside for women in public procurement, legal remedies to close the gender pay gap, and women's participation in key economic sectors, access to assets such as land, and women's financial inclusion and empowerment. Most countries in the SADC region rely on South Africa in some way for their imports. They import goods from South Africa, and some import goods from global sources via South African seaports such as Durban. Other countries like Zimbabwe and Zambia are strategic transiting countries for goods transiting from Durban. And you can see on the screen, this is the stats relating for the transportation for January to June via road this year. Notwithstanding the pandemic, you can see it still has been quite extensive, and you can see what a strategic role South Africa plays into and out of the continent by road as well as by rail. So moving on, as you can see, because we also move goods out of the country and onto the continent via the SADC region and further, from a continental perspective, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement has been held as the single most progressive step forward for the continent in advancing economic development and also in mitigating the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Heads of state of the African Union decided on its establishment in 2012, and it was formally adopted in Rwanda in 2018. Currently, 54 countries have signed the agreement and 30 have ratified the agreement. You can see from the graphic on the screen that there's only one country which hasn't signed the agreement, and that's Eritrea. The agreement aims essentially to boost intra-African trade by 52% by harmonizing a market of 1.2 billion people to become the world's biggest free trade market. So removing tariffs on 90% of traded goods and allowing services, commodities, products, and people free movement are among some of the basic protocols to counter trade barriers and slow development on the continent. This agreement has the potential for catalytic change. At the same time, it poses a lot of challenges. Intra-regional trade in Africa currently accounts for 15% of exports. While this can be attributed in part to high tariffs on the continent, combined with colonial era infrastructure, the complexity of multi-regional economic community membership also acts as a barrier. However, intra-Africa trade is steadily increasing though, and the free trade areas that were established before the agreement came about based their approaches for developmental integration on industrial development, market integration, and infrastructure development. And this focus continues under the agreement, a key goal of which is to promote investment in quality infrastructure to boost competitiveness and increase cross-border trade, particularly for historically marginalized groups. So the emphasis on infrastructure investment is crucial, given that realizing Africa's economic potential hinges on the availability of infrastructure in all spheres: communication, transport such as roads, air, cross-border railways, energy supply, digital infrastructure such as connectivity and access, and strategic facilities such as trade harbors, financial hubs, and special economic zones. Technical expertise is also required to manage the infrastructure in an efficient manner. And while the agreement aims to promote economic development for all, it also addresses exclusionary economic development, particularly along gender lines and in other marginalized communities. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa has noted that the economic empowerment of women will be one of the effects of the agreement. And total income for female labor is expected to grow faster than average income growth in all regions, with the exception of the Southern African region. So all member states are mindful of the challenges that they will face, and these challenges have been acknowledged. And what are the challenges? They're existing challenges that were faced by the regional economic communities as they existed before the agreement as well. The extent of economic fragmentation across Africa, because it's a diverse continent with several varieties of capitalism, differing and sometimes conflicting trade standards and certifications, weak and fragmented regimes for resolving transnational disputes and promoting competition and investment. Africa lacks economic diversification and suffers from what is called the resource curse, a colonial era throwback that prevents most nations from benefiting from their resource abundance. The removal of trade barriers for regional integration needs to be facilitated at an expedited pace. There needs to be a focus on trade composition and diversification. Most importantly, the development of e-commerce across the African continent is vital. Affordable information and communication technology and enhanced connectivity in rural and remote areas is a necessity, along with the appropriate legal framework to support digital activities, trade, data privacy, data protection, and cybersecurity. And the short to medium challenges of smaller countries, regions, and businesses that will be encountered as a result of adjustment costs and higher trading costs. Rules of origin and tariff concessions, which are critical issues, have not yet been agreed upon or decided. But notwithstanding these challenges, the member states are considering what the solutions to that are. They're constantly meeting and discussing ways in which to address that. And this involves multiple stakeholders working together, trying to improve cross-border initiatives, which involves a lot of IT technology and infrastructure investments. Also included in that is incentivizing perhaps green growth for industrialization, discussions regarding the appointment of Pan-African networks of experts to generate coherent proposals for harmonization of standards and certifications to address non-tariff measures, and perhaps also establishing dedicated African commercial courts to preside over ACFA-related arbitration matters. So these are the challenges and possible solutions that are being and responses to it in relation to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. But those challenges are also very similar to the challenges that are being faced by South Africa on a national level when one looks at the reconstruction and recovery plan, and also the challenges at a provincial level when one looks at Durban and KZN as a region. But notwithstanding, what is key about all of this is that trade is required for the economy to get back on track. And in order for trade, you need transport. So transport is a key facilitator to economic recovery. And that is it from me, Candice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trudy. Very, very insightful presentation. I just want to put my video on so you can all see me. Trudy, before I ask you a question, I've got some questions that I want to run past you. I think if we can just bring our panel members on, and if you can, Mpumi and Zandile, if you can just turn on your cameras, and then we can take the discussion further. As we wait for their cameras to be turned on, Mpumi's came on first. Mpumi is from Unilever. I look forward to hearing the insights that you are going to bring to us today and just what Unilever have achieved during this year. I think there's been huge challenges that we've had to face. And also, I'm interested to hear what you have in store for the foreseeable future to drive economic growth. I then have Zandile. Zandile is an account manager at Itala, where she holds a position as account manager. and looking after the franchise and asset portfolio. Zandile has 8 years experience in providing development finance to businesses across KZN. So with that, Trudy, I'm going to fire a question off to you as well. And just a reminder to all the people on the call today, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please just pop them into the Q&A and I'll pick them up and I can ask those questions. So Trudy, from your presentation, what do you believe is the biggest challenge? I saw that you did list a couple of challenges that we do face currently. But what is the biggest challenge we face around road and rail, and what can we do in the short term to ensure that this challenge is addressed in order to drive growth in the economy?
Candice, the biggest challenge is infrastructure, because infrastructure is key. So that I think there's two challenges. The first is infrastructure, because infrastructure is key for any transport system as a whole. And the investment in infrastructure. And at this point in time, I think we're all cognizant of the fact that our government doesn't have money for investment in infrastructure, which then takes us to the PPP aspects of it. But because of the nature of COVID and how it's impacted every single sector, the PPP, so foreign direct investment, has reduced as a result. And because there's not that much foreign direct investment monies around, it affects PPP investments. So that is generally where most PPP investments would come from. So, and that affects our infrastructure investments. So that's one of the challenges, is finding foreign direct investments for our PPP infrastructure investment, which is crucial to our transport system. And this relates to our road, this relates to our rail as well. And when you're looking at rail, it's not just local or national, it's also continental. You're looking at things like the North-South corridor, which is a long rail corridor, which will have a huge impact for the continent as a whole. And the second issue that impacts it is efficiencies. Like I said, efficiencies is what drives the transport system. So consumers choose supply chains and logistics corridors that are efficient. It's about economic distance. It's not about geographic distance. So consumers will use a transport corridor that is economically more effective for them and shorter. So it can be geographically a long distance, but if it's efficient and it works effectively and it's more cost effective, they will use that. So you can find that you can have a port with a distance to an economic hub being quite short geographically, but because it's so inefficient in the manner in which it turns around cargo, etc., that it's actually more cost effective for those same, shippers and movers of goods to actually use a port that is further away, because economically the distance is cheaper, and that's the deciding factor. So it's efficiencies across the transport system and finding the funding for infrastructure development.
Absolutely. So I think my next question, just in terms of infrastructure development, Zandile, I'm going to ask you this question. I think you are perfectly poised to address this. And if I can just ask you to turn your microphone on so we can hear your response to my question. So obviously, being part of Atala, my question to you is, how does Atala ensure that funding reaches the right people? And what I mean by that is, we have an infrastructure crisis and we need obviously spend to go in that area. How do we ensure that it reaches the right people so they get the job done? And then also we could link that to, how do we get the spend to women in the transport space so we can promote the women in business?
Thank you, Candice. Good morning to everyone who's joining today's session. It's quite a privilege to be part of this discussion. It is indeed a very important discussion. Just to come back to your question, Candice, before I just answer your question, I'd just like to give a brief introduction on who Itala is as a DFI. Basically, Itala is a development finance institution that looks after the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Our mandate basically is to drive economic growth in the province of KwaZulu-Natal and to increase Black participation in all economic sectors. Coming back to your question, Candice, how do we ensure that our funding reaches the right people? Basically, when we assess applications, we are guided by a policy that details the qualifying criteria that is to be used in funding applicants. So there is quite a number of things that we look at, but just to touch on the important ones, maybe what we look for, as I have indicated, that we are a KZN based development finance institution. So the first and foremost thing that we look at is the location of the business. We look at where the economic benefit or the economic impact will be flowing. And for us to be able to assist our applicants, the economic impact must be for the benefit of the people of KwaZulu-Natal. So that's one thing that we look at. And secondly, and very important, we look at financial viability of the business or the business idea or project that is looking to be financed. So it's very important that it has to show profitability and it must demonstrate the ability to repay the loan. That is so that we are able to assist other people in the future and that we also remain sustainable as a development bank.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zandile. Trudy, I'm going to ask you a question and then it's going to lead on to a question to Mpumi. So our president has announced the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. This rollout of infrastructure spend will be approximately R1 trillion over the next 4 years, with a focus on schools, water, sanitation, housing, and critical network infrastructure, what we're discussing today, which is road, rail, and ports. How do we as women in business drive this recovery plan? And I think it's important, and I think an event like today is a great networking opportunity for us to get together, put ideas together, and see how we drive that recovery plan to ensure that what they're trying to achieve is in fact achieved. Trudy?
Thank you, Candice. Yes, and I think I can link this back to what Tozy said earlier in her introduction, where she spoke about how it's important for women to network through institutions like the Women in Business Forum, which is part of the Durban Chamber of Commerce. That is one of the ways. Obviously, the initial bit is education, but with education, we're going back. We're going back to to the youth. We're talking about women as they are who are currently in various sectors already and are established. So for that, it's key to join various forums and to network to ensure that your business is known and is acknowledged so that you can take advantage of whatever opportunities there are out there and to have your business known for whatever it is that it does. So for those women who are already in managerial positions and already have businesses and who are entrepreneurs, it's networking and it's joining, key forums such as the Women in Business Forum, like the Durban Chamber of Commerce, where you can meet with relevant individuals to help you connect to, to financing and to various sectors that will help grow your business and network you to the correct individuals. So I think for women, it's about that at this point in time to ensure that you are on the track to economic recovery for your existing business as it is.
Absolutely. And I think through networks like this, we can support each other to make sure that we do grow the transport space. So Mpumi, my question to you, and I think I'm quite interested to just understand, what were some of the challenges that Unilever have faced during this year as a result of the COVID pandemic, and what lessons have been learned from the past, which we can now use to our advantage in driving the South African economy going forward?
Firstly, good morning to all attendees and the guest, and thanks, Kenneth, for the good question. So really looking at the private business side of things, Unilever's, I think the one thing that during COVID that we really first struggled with was getting our raw materials shipped into the country, which is sad because we have to actually import raw materials which we could source in Africa. Africa is vast in agricultural land, but somehow we're not able to utilize that to our benefit. And as a result, we have to import our ingredients for mostly our, if you saw during COVID, there was an uptick in home cooking, which means that people are buying more ingredients at home. And that is one sector or part of the business that saw an increase in demand. And most of the basic ingredients are imported. Getting those ingredients was a big challenge. So transportation into the country was the first challenge that we had to face. But with that being said, we're able to work around that and use alternatives and source other things locally where we could. And secondly, the other achievement was we're able to focus on essential products first and foremost before the add-ons or the luxuries in our production, in our factories, which are half of them in the country, which rely a lot on transportation for the goods we move back to the retailers, obviously. And in doing so, our limited capacity of people not being able to come to work and producing or being able to produce at normal capacity, we had to only choose the priority products to produce. By doing that, we're able to remain in business and offer what the market required at that point in time. So achievement was that. To add on to through this comment, I want to say something about the network and how do you work better going forward. For me, we're in an era of collaboration. It's no longer about networking, it's about collaboration. Why am I saying this? The lesson I learned during this time was when we were stuck in our factories with lack of skills, people were getting sick and couldn't come to work. We had to tap into other companies who work like us to source their engineers to come and help us in our factories. That has not been done before. We had never to work with competitors before. It was always us against them. But COVID forced us to look at how can we take the skills we share across different sectors and companies and pull them together to then tap into them on demand. And for us as women in transportation, how can we collaborate better? Where can we collaborate to ensure we build our capacity better and we build our, we tap into skills that we can't have access to or possess ourselves individually and try and leverage off those to then get into the bigger and wider market into Africa. And the last point to add was efficiencies, infrastructure is a very, very important point for us. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. We're producing mostly in South Africa as a company, but we also supply the other African countries with our products. The one thing we struggle with often is getting the products we're producing to reach the customer or the consumer, distributors in those outlying areas. And because the roads aren't fully developed in some of the countries, we have to use things like bicycles and motorbikes to get our goods delivered. There will be a time when we can use more formal transportation like we have in South Africa. If we can get there, to take us probably quicker to get there. But for now, as women in transportation, what can we do to push for developing infrastructure to ensure we are able to create our own value chain, our own demand? Because if we rely on what is current in the way things are, we'll always be struggling for more business. But if we're creating our own value chain and expand what we can supply and how to get there quicker through pushing and probably lobbying in the right spaces for development of infrastructure in rural areas and the likes, we can start seeing more women coming in to then compete in the bigger market, which is also cross-border. Just my view of the industry and my take on how things can be expanded. But collaboration is key.
Absolutely. I think for me, growing the economy, and one thing that you touched on is growing, to make sure that we source local products. So one of the questions, and Mpumi, I'm going to throw it back at you, is that how do we ensure that we integrate women in this process to ensure that we actually drive the consumption of local produce? And I think you and I touched on it before the session, is just, importing goods, it is expensive. So why don't we promote local consumption, support local farmers? I think that's something that is key that we need to start looking at. But I'm interested to hear your viewpoints just in terms of, empowering women in that space.
Yes, I think that's quite critical. I will just mention that, as a country, like I said earlier on, we have agricultural land that is vast everywhere. And the president actually announced that there's land available that's owned by government that we can now access as women to then see how we can farm. The things that I think are hindering us in getting to that space, maybe it's a perception of agriculture, how it's being perceived, not being fancy. It is hard work, but as Africa is something for us to explore into. I'll give an example. All our spices in our company requires chilies. We have to import chilies. Our weather in South Africa, our soil in South Africa or Africa is proper and can grow chilies perfectly, but somehow that is still being imported from India and the likes. Tea, another item that all of us drink. Tea, we all have plantations in East Africa, nothing in the southern part of Africa. That could be something to explore. Our weather is perfect for that. How do we start doing that? Just to share with you, Unilever is a fund where if you're a supplier to Unilever and you're having difficulty in funding your business, we give you interest-free loan. We're not a bank. We give interest-free loan to support your business in being able to deliver what we require from you. Not only our company, other FMCG companies have the same offering that we can tap into as well. So how do we start exploring those spaces? But again, if you want to come and say, I will only give you 1 ton of chilies a year, it's not big enough. We need more than that. But if you bring more people into the space and collaborate with them and then give us 100 tons instead of 1 ton, that becomes a compelling business for us to look into. So it's not about only taking the offer, it's about scaling it up to make sure it meets the demand that we've got as a company as well.
Thank you, Mpumi. Zandile, my questions for you next is, some of the members that are on this call today, I think it's important for them to maybe understand what opportunities exist at Itala, just in terms of funding initiatives that are currently available, that they can maybe tap into if they are interested in growing the economy through transport and road or rail.
Thank you, Candice. I'll just touch on the type of funding instruments that we do have at Itala, and then from there, I'll move on to the products that we actually finance. Basically, we have about 3 funding instruments. We have debt finance, we have equity, and we have hybrid, which is a mix of both equity and debt. And we have various products under which we provide funding to our applicants. We've got structured finance, that is where we look at things like your acquisition of businesses, and we've got procurement finance. That is the product under which we finance things like your order, and that's where we assist mostly people that have obtained even contracts. And then we've got commercial property finance. That's where we look at like your property, and maybe if you want to construct like a center or something like that, we are able to finance you there. And then we have commercial assets finance, which is something that I will just go a little bit in detail a little bit later on, because it touches on today's discussion. And we have franchise finance, and then we have microfinance, which actually involves all the products that I've mentioned above, but the only difference with microfinance is that we only look at amounts that are below 500,000. And then we also have agricultural finance. Just for the purpose of today's discussion, as I have mentioned, I will just maybe focus on commercial asset finance, which is the product that we would look into if we were to finance anything in the transport and logistics sector. Basically, under that product, as I have mentioned earlier, we look for viable business opportunities, and we are able to finance both startup companies and companies that have existing operations. What we look for, especially in companies that are starting up, we look for people that have already sort of created relationships with their potential customers, and they have obtained offtake agreements or even letters of intent. But the important thing is that in those offtake agreements, they have to sort of show a commitment that the potential customer is willing to work with our applicant, and they're willing to support them, so that we are also comfortable in giving them funding. So what we look for when we assess these applications, when we get the offtake agreement, we whether the agreement has stipulated the period of the agreement. It has sort of indicated the minimum volumes that they will be giving to our applicant on monthly basis. And basically we also look at the rates that they are willing to pay to them. So we have funded startups in this sector, and we look for people that have sort of created a relationship with blue chip companies. But even if it's not a blue chip company, but it must be someone that will at least be willing to allow us to do a little bit of background check on them, just to satisfy ourselves that they will indeed have the capacity to give you that much work. So we've got two funds that we finance under. We've got a commercial fund, which is Itala Fund, and we also have a development fund. So under the development fund, we've got very competitive rates. If we're looking for women and we're looking at co-ops, we're looking at the youth, you can probably walk away with a rate that is between anything between 4 and 7% fixed, which is a very competitive rate. So we also have our commercial fund, which is prime linked. But again, we really look to empower, like you have asked in the previous question, we look at empowering women. So we really do encourage women to approach us, because we have better rates for them, the youth and the women, we give them better rates under our development fund. So just to touch on those that are already operational, we also assist them. We look at the history of their performance, how they have performed historically, and we look at the term of the contract, the remaining term. If they have contractual agreements in place, we look at the remaining term. If the term is still sufficient for us to finance them, then we are able to provide funding, and we look at whether they have any upcoming or current agreements in place. Thank you, Candice.
Awesome. Thank you, Zandile. So my question to probably all three of you is that what role are you playing currently in the transport and logistics space to drive economic growth? We've spoken about efficiencies and how we improve efficiencies in this space. But Mpumi, maybe you can start off and then I'll move to Trudy, just in terms of what your involvement is. Because I think it's important that people on this call understand what you bring to the table, and they can then connect with you and collaborate in some way or another.
Okay. So the one thing that probably I would say from the company perspective that I will bring in is our company needs to distribute our goods to our retailers, obviously. Logistics or the transportation parts can be either owned by the customer or it's outsourced. Currently, we have an outsourced model where people with transportation can be outsourced to then distribute on our behalf to the customer. That's the one option. The second part also is the fact that we also have a new approach of approaching this Spaza market, more informal sector in South Africa, through a KD, a distribution model that is not even in place right now. We don't have one. We need to get to Spaza shops. We don't know how to get there at this point in time. And if a concept or a plan can be presented, there is a solution to that, with linking to how do I pick up and deliver to them, and then how do I get paid for that. That's something that we also we're looking into, not solved for now. And then probably thirdly is we look at also how do we put different players in the value chain, because we believe in localization. We have to localize all of our inputs into our production. And if we can get all of that done locally, it would be a plus. And if we can find a way to, whether it's production, manufacturing, or it is just purely farming. And then in those two, as those develop, the transport sector develops, because we now have a demand that's been created in the local market as well.
I think sometimes it's a little bit difficult to bring some privatization in the logistics space, specifically, obviously, in terms of rail. And I think that's obviously a conversation that needs to be had, because that's where I believe there will be some sort of change in driving the economy, is privatizing, certain segments of the logistics space. Trudy, on your side, just in terms of your involvement and where you see, you know, us women on this panel and the women that are on this call, and I think it's important to maybe not just, you know, say women. I think men are also integral in driving the economy. And Trudy, just what your involvement is and where you see we could drive economic growth.
So my involvement is largely from a legal and regulatory and compliance perspective. So we act as transaction advisors and just advising our own individual clients who are traders or transporters or freight forwarders or shippers, etc., and who have to interface with various government entities at cross-border or at the port or warehousing, and have to transport goods and are encountering various problems. So it's basically to understand the regulatory framework within which they have to operate and how this relates to their business activities, where it's cross-border within the African continent context, understanding the various regional economic community agreements that they will have to interface with, and how that relates to what it is that they are doing, the activities that they're undertaking, and how those agreements interface with the relevant laws of the countries that their goods or their vehicles are moving through, and advising them accordingly on proper compliance and regulatory compliance to get things moving. Alternatively, advising institutions on compliance in order to get a specific type of intervention going, in order to, you know, facilitate a PPP investment for infrastructure development, in order to facilitate certain transport systems, which will in turn facilitate economic stimulation. So that's where we are involved from Bowman's perspective, and from what I specifically do in the transport and logistics sector space.
Absolutely. So I can see from the delegates, I haven't seen any questions come through yet. So just a reminder that if you do have any questions for our panel members, please pop them into the Q&A so we can pick their brains and get as much insights on what they have to share today. Sorry, Trudy.
There have been questions. For example, one of the questions which I did answer related to Zambia and the DRC, and I'll just mention it out because it was a follow-up question. Zambia and DRC, I think it was, not having signed the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and that they are key to the North-South corridor. And I responded by saying that actually they have signed, they just haven't ratified. So 54 countries have signed the agreement. The only country that hasn't signed it is Eritrea. And 30 have ratified it, which makes it operable legally. And it was intended to come into full operation this year, but due to COVID, that hasn't happened. So it's in the process, the member states in the process are busy agreeing all the relevant protocols. And most of them have been agreed, but key ones haven't, such as rules of origin and tariff concessions. So Zambia and DRC haven't ratified it yet, but that doesn't detract from the fact that regional economic communities on the African continent as they existed previously are still in operation and do still remain. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement does not take away from that. It doesn't cancel those out. They still exist. And the intention is to incorporate that into the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and to have it work harmoniously. So with regard to the question relating to the North-South corridor, if you just simply go into, you can Google it. You'll find that, you know, the North-South corridor as it stands at the moment, you know, does exist. It does need maintenance, it needs rehabilitation, and there is actually work at the moment ongoing on ways in which to upgrade and rehabilitate it to make it a more efficient corridor for transportation entirely along that corridor, and how this will work between the various countries and which country will pay for what aspect of the rehabilitation, whether it's rehabilitation or completely new infrastructure. So because it's already been in existence, it already has a form of a management structure that already exists. So yeah, you can either try and Google it, or you can contact me afterwards and I'll give you information as to how to get hold of them. But it does exist, and the fact that those countries which form part of that corridor haven't ratified the agreement doesn't detract from the fact that the corridor does exist, and there are plans in place already to deal with the upgrade and rehabilitation of that corridor to make it a more effective corridor. I think I hope that
Thank you,
answers your
Trudy.
questions.
I do see that I've got to the Q&A. So there is another one regarding an industry like the construction industry. To what extent will the private sector be brought in on the establishment of quality protocols for the movement building materials like cement? And Trudy, I think that was linked to you, a question from Nicholas.
If that's in connection with the agreement, once again, then all associations that are involved in relation to all sectors do participate. So the cement industry, once again, will be part of a specific sector. And when the protocols are being agreed, it's not just the member states that are giving their input. Member states give their input, and the sectors within that country give their input to the member states, to the relevant department of the state. So yes, it is key for private entities to have their input, and they do have their input, because those are the ones, it's the private companies that are the key facilitators that will be doing the importing and the exporting and the moving of cargo and goods between countries. So yes, they do play a role, and they do provide inputs. So that will happen. That is happening.
Absolutely. Mpumi, there's a question for you. As a female startup in the transport sector, how does one tap into the transportation or logistics opportunities in Unilever, for example?
Okay. I think that's the question I was referring to through collaboration. The one thing that I would suggest is probably that person connects with me. Just give me a call. Barry has my number. Let's talk and understand when we say startup, what level are you at? What are your needs, and because our criteria to become a supplier is quite strict, but it's nothing impossible. It may take a few months to get there, but we can get there. But it needs some real focus to get it complied with.
I'm also just reading some of the comments that are coming in. So Nati, Ms. Langer, Unilever has this unmanned system for receiving certain correspondence, but unfortunately we haven't heard a response from them on the ESD and procurement question. How do I proceed from here? So it's directly addressing you.
Same. Same. Yes, I agree with you. Our process, we don't have a tender system at all. That's to open, say, come and apply, we'll then give you a tender. It's really about getting a supplier fully compliant before being allowed to even go through the process. And most of the stumbling blocks take place in the compliance piece. So Durban Chamber is also willing to support, set up people to be fully compliant before you can take them forward. Because if you go in and apply when you 80% compliant, is not going to work for you. You are wasting your time. But once you know beforehand, we can support you and make sure that does happen before you even apply. So get in touch and then let's talk about it.
One of the questions that came through from Henk is just this management structure. Is this public knowledge, and how can one access this for assistance? Trudy, I don't know if you want to take that question.
Yes, as I was saying, it is essentially public knowledge, and you can access it, by researching onto the North-South corridor. But if he has a problem with that, he's welcome to contact me directly, and I'll give him information regarding it.
Absolutely. I don't have any other questions from the from the delegates. Trudy, I don't know if you want to, just in closing, and maybe just add some insight to our conversation today, and then we'll jump on to Mpumi and Zandile, and if there are no other questions that come through, we can then close the webinar.
Thank you, Candice. Just in closing, to say that, at the height of the pandemic, it was the transport system that kept our economy, particularly now I speak in the South African context, from contracting at an even worse rate than it has. And that is why, the transport sector is so key for our economy. And that's not just our economy, it's every country's economy. And that is also the reason why the transport sector is going to be so key to the recovery of our economy. So those in the transport sector play a vital role, and particularly women in the transport sector, play a vital role as well. And this is the time for them to mobilize themselves and to not give up, because I know that most companies have suffered as a result of COVID and the impacts of the lockdown measures, and largely women-owned companies. And now is the time for them to just, stack and pull themselves up and get themselves ready to help bring the economy back on track, and likewise their own companies as well.
I think it's important to, during hard times that we network the way that we do and we collaborate, because hopefully in hard times we come up with some great ideas and we're able to then drive change. Trudy, maybe one of the things that, before, as a final comment, is just in terms of the efficiencies that we discussed. So one of the things that we had chatted about is just obviously technology that's going to play a role in the transport space. Are there any other efficiencies that you can then think of that we can, maybe discuss further that will drive the economic growth in this sector?
It's largely the manner in which the deployment of labor is used in order to get companies back at work. So we're now at officially level 1, which means most companies are operating practically at normal levels, which means that companies such as those with which transport companies interface, such as border controls and ports, for example, where you have to do a lot of customs clearance and examining of cargo and examining of vehicles, etc. During the height of the pandemic, when we were at level 5 and 4 and 3 and 2, that was taking long, and that was resulting in inefficiencies and time delays, because we don't have the digital advancements that we need and that we are aiming for. So everything is manual, let's be clear. So with the move to lockdown level 1, we have more people back at work, even with the social distancing and sanitizing and keeping safe. But with more people back at work, that should result in more efficiencies for quicker turnaround time. So more efficiencies means just quicker turnaround time at every single aspect of the interface in the transport chain in order to make it move more quicker and more effectively. So it's all about turnaround times at every single interface.
Absolutely. I think also in terms of going green and looking after the environment, I think that's something that we also need to consider, just in terms of what is the most efficient way to transport goods across South Africa. And, we haven't touched too much on rail, but I think that is something that needs intervention. A lot of our product is transported on road, and that's something that we need to look at. And how do we drive change in the rail industry so more product is moved on rail, because that obviously then links to energy efficiencies and looking after the environment. But thank you, Trudy. I don't know if you have any views on that, on growing the rail sector.
Yeah, I think everyone knows and acknowledges that the use of rail does reduce carbon emissions, and that's acknowledged. And when you're doing infrastructure development from a transport logistics perspective, if it's a greenfield project, and you have a choice between road and rail, you're going to go rail because it's environmentally friendly and sustainable. But at the moment, we're not looking at greenfield. We're just looking at recovery, and we're looking at what we have at play in the moment. But also from the perspective of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, one of the possible solutions that I just briefly touched on as ways to deal with possible challenges that arise. One of the challenges that has been noted is that with the increase in intra-African trade, because most of that trade is by road, you're going to have an increase in carbon emissions, which is not going to be environmentally friendly. So one of the possible solutions to that is to consider ways in which to incentivize green industrialization and green infrastructure development. So it is taken into account in the agreement as a challenge and as possible solutions. So people are thinking about it, they are aware of it, and it is acknowledged that rail is, there are less carbon emissions with rail than with road. But as things stand at the moment, most of our goods on the continent are transported by road, not as much by rail, and you would have seen that also from the slides. But yes, we're mindful of it because that is also part of the Sustainable Development Goals, which as African countries, we are also striving towards as well.
Absolutely. Sandile, I don't know if you have any final comments that you'd like to add in terms of what has been discussed.
Just in closing, Candace, I actually like that Mpumi touched on them outsourcing some of their transportation services. What I'd like to say to our entrepreneurs this morning, and especially our women and young people, is that there are entities like that, like Unilever, who actually outsource their transport services. So I'll just urge them to approach them and see what opportunities are there. And then if they have been given such opportunities, our doors at Itala are open, because you find that most of the time entities like Unilever are sort of holding back to give the entrepreneurs the work, but because they do not have the capital, they won't be able to get the capital to actually purchase the vehicles and be able to provide the service as required. So they will opt for second-hand trucks and things like that. But we're saying at Itala, our doors are open. We are willing to assist our entrepreneurs so they can approach these organizations and find out the opportunities and come back to us, and we will be able to assist them with funding. Thank you, Candice.
Awesome. Thank you, Zandile. Thank you very much. Mpumi, last comments on your side. Thank you for, the views that you've shared so far. Just in terms of what Trudy and I discussed, I don't know if you have anything further to add as some last comments for today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Candice. I think for me, transportation goes also beyond rail, as Trudy has mentioned. We often don't look at the sea part of transportation. Women aren't featuring in that space at all. And there is resources to fund the vessels. And there aren't enough vessels to move the goods. And for as Africans, we're not playing there much. Something for us to explore. Again, it may require collaboration. It may require pulling our resources together, or even crowdfunding and things like that. But it's something to explore. But again, to just echo what was being said earlier on, we have to think about how to keep our environment clean. Unilever as a company, we are about sustainability of the environment. We look at green, we recycle almost everything we do. So if you come with that lever in your business offering, it's something for us to explore and look into as well. So I want to say, I wish all of the women on the call success, and don't give up. Think of collaboration, think bigger, think scaling, so we can be able to offer a service to bigger companies and not come in on your own, because often that makes you not succeed in your application.
Absolutely. Trudy, Zandile, Mpumi, thank you so much for the insights that you've shared today. I think it has been valuable. I think for the delegates on this call today, just know that we, DMG will host other events like this, and I think it's important that we connect as women and men in the transport space to ensure that we grow business and grow the economy. We were talking about a possible lockdown again in the near future. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But I think, this year has been an interesting year, and it's shown us that we are resilient. We can, step up to change and doing things differently. And sometimes when you put in a difficult situation, that's exactly what you need to re-energize and don't just do things the way that we've always done things in the past. So that's pretty much what I have to say to end the conversation. Kelly, I know you'll come back on just to say some final words, and then we can take it from there. Thank you very much.
Candice, thank you so
there we
much.
go.
Yes, sorry, I was just struggling with my sound. Thank you so very much. I just want to thank all our speakers for participation today. And I just wanted to let you know that the Women in Transport Awards is there to acknowledge the contributions and achievements in the transport sector. These digital sessions are used to share content, network with industry leaders, and will lead, of course, to the actual awards ceremony in September 2021. And I'm not sure if you know, but Trudy and Tozi are part of the esteemed judging panel, and More Global, specifically Candice, will be the official auditor for the awards next year. So I want to thank you all for your time and participation, and of course for all those attending today's session. It is recorded and will be made available to all our registered attendees in the coming weeks, as well as Trudy's presentation. So thank you so much for your time this morning, and I do hope that you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Kelly.
Bye-bye.